Hey everybody, it's Miss Sawyer. We're here to talk about solving some inequalities today. So before we get into the actual example problems I wanted to walk through with you, the things I wanted to make sure that you remembered about inequalities that you might have forgotten about is when you have a greater than or equal to or a less than or equal to symbol, these are going to be closed circles because they are what is called included in the solution set. And if you have a greater than or a less than, those are going to be open circles because they are not included. Okay, so when we go through graphing some inequalities, you just want to remember the difference between your closed and your open circles. And then, of course, the last thing, remember that you always flip the inequality. Whoops. We always flip the inequality, and if you remember this, flip. Oh, we're going to change colors apparently. We always flip the inequality when we multiply or we divide by a negative. Okay, so just keep that in the back of your mind as we go through this whole thing because we will run into certain situations. So let's start off with some basics about graphing. So if we are going to graph the equation of x is greater than or equal to 4, the first thing I would look at is I've got a greater than or equal to. That means I need a closed circle at 4. So I need a closed circle at 4, and because it's greater than or equal to, I'm going to shade off to the right. If I have x is greater than -5, that means I'm greater than -5, but I don't include -5, so I get an open circle at -5, but I'm still greater than, so I'm still going to draw off to my right side. On the other hand, when we have k is less than 5, we're going to have an open circle at 5 because we're not including 5, but less than, we're going to shade off to the left. I used to have a teacher once that told me that she always remembered less than because if you make an L with your hand and you turn it a little bit sideways, you get the less than symbol. Anyhow, now we have x is less than or equal to -1. So again, we're going to have a closed circle because it is or equal to. So we have a closed circle at -1 and we go off to the left. So we're going to be solving some inequalities on these next examples. I'm sorry, before we do that, we need to be able to write the inequality if we are shown in the graph. So the first thing I would look at is you look at your endpoint. Well, my endpoint is at -6. I have a shaded closed circle, which means I have the or equal to. I'm going left, so I'm going less than, and I can pick any variable that I want to. So x would be less than or equal to -6. Again, I start with my endpoint. My endpoint is at -1, but I have an open circle, so that means it's not going to have the or equal to bar, but I'm going off to the right, which means I'm going greater than, and I give myself a variable. So x is greater than -1. Now, when we have equations with inequalities, solving them is no different than solving problems that we've seen before. If I had 12 plus k equals 30, how would I solve for k? Well, I would just subtract 12 from both sides. The only difference between this problem and the one that I just wrote is that they have used an inequality symbol in this spot. But we'll solve it the exact same way. So we will end up with k is greater than 18. Well, that means I go to 18. It's greater than, not or equal to, just greater than, and it's greater than, so I shade off to the right. Now, in number 8, we get a little bit of a situation here. We have -5 is less than 9 plus n. If we wanted to solve for n, normally we would do what? Subtract 9 from both sides. Well, that would leave us with -14 is less than n. Now, people often get confused when this is written backwards because they're not sure which direction to shade. So I tell people when it was written like this, flip the whole thing around. The open side of this inequality goes towards the n. Make the open side go towards n, Flip the whole equation around, and now it's written like you're used to seeing. So at -14, you got your open circle. It's shading to the right, so we shade to the right. So keep things easy for yourself by keeping the variable on the left, and you'll find it to be a whole lot simpler as you work through these problems. So moving on to question number 9. So question number 9, we have -4 is less than, -4x is less than or equal to 20. Now, to get x by itself, we need to divide. Now, we also need to divide by a negative. When we do that, my variable stays, my inequality flips, and I have my answer. Well, 20 divided by -4 is -5. Now I'll make sure that I have the graph that's going in the right direction. So we have a closed circle at -5, and this is saying greater than, so we shade off to the right. In number 10, we have v divided by 8 is less than or equal to 18. Well, if it's division happening to my variable, to undo it, I multiply. Cancels my 8's out, so I get v is less than or equal to 144. So I have a closed circle at 144. It's less than, so I shade to the left. In number 11, now we get into the two-step equations. So we have n divided by 6 minus 5 is less than or equal to -2. So we're going to solve this like we would any other equation. We're going to add 5 to both sides to get rid of the -5. So we get n divided by 6 is less than or equal to 3. Now we're back to a problem just like we had in number 10. We'll times both sides by 6. So we end up with an answer of n is less than or equal to 18. Less than or equal to means closed circle. Less than shades left. Same idea with number 12, but remember we're going to have to flip this because our variable is on the other side here. So let's work it through. 4 is less than 2 plus x divided by 6. We'll move the 2 first. Now you could flip the whole equation around at the very beginning if you chose to. That's perfectly fine. So we have 2 is less than x divided by 6. So we'll multiply both sides by 6 to get rid of the division. So we have 12 is less than x, but if we want to write this so we're ready to graph it, we will have x is greater than 12. See, we're going to flip the whole thing backwards. So 12, open circle, because it's not an or equal to, and greater than, shades to the right. Only a few more of these to take a look at. So the problems are just going to continue to grow in their difficulty level, but they're still completely solvable problems. So let's take a look here. 253 is greater than, let's go ahead and distribute while we're here, 5 plus 30a plus 8. Let's combine some like terms. So we have 253 is greater than 13 plus 30a. We can subtract the 13. So we get 240 is greater than, 30a. Divide both sides by 30. Now that's going to leave us with 8 is greater than a, but we're going to flip it all backwards and say a is less than 8. So we're going to have an open circle at 8, shade left for less than, and we're all set. Let's change colors just in case we run into some room issues. All right, so number 14, we will bring down the 96 is less than or equal to 8 plus, let's distribute the 4. 4 times 5x would get me 20x. 4 times 2 would get me 8. Combine like terms. So we have 96 is less than or equal to 16 plus 20x. Subtract the 16. That's going to leave us with 80 is less than or equal to 20x. divide both sides by your 20. So we're left with 4 is less than or equal to x, and we'll switch it backwards and say x is greater than or equal to 4. Go back to our graph. Greater than or equal to means a closed dot. Greater than shades to the right. Now, I'm going to give you a brief introduction to these last two problems. Okay, we have compound inequalities. We have what are called ands, and we have or problems. Okay, easy way to think about this. And is going to shade between, and ors, sorry about that, ors are going to shade in opposite directions. So ors are going to have two little branches that go in opposite directions. The ands are going to have two endpoints, and we're going to be shading in between those two. So how you solve these both is a little bit different. We're going to have another lesson on these as well, so don't worry if you struggle with these at first. So let's rewrite this problem. 2 is less than or equal to 10m minus 8 is less than 62. Now, we're going to work from the middle to both ends. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add 8. The goal is to still get m by itself, but instead of having m on one side, we want to get m by itself in the middle. So I'm going to add 8 to both ends of this equation. So it's going to look like we're doing it 3 times. We're going to cancel it off in the middle, add it on the left end. So we've got 10 is less than or equal to 10m is less than 62 plus 8 would get me 70. Now, in order to get this 10 by, or the m by itself, I have to get rid of the 10. These are being multiplied. So I want to do the opposite. I want to divide everything in this problem by 10. Well, if I do that, 10 divided by 10 is 1. Leave the sign alone, less than or equal to. These 10s cancel and just leave me with m. 70 divided by 10 is 7. So now here's how we graph something that looks like this. On the 1, you're going to put a closed circle because it is less than or equal to. So on 1, we get a closed circle. At 7, we get an open circle because there's no bar down here. So at 7, we get an open circle, and because this is an and problem, we're going to shade in between those two. And that's what the graph of my solution would look like. Here's how you would write your solution, and that's what your graph would look like. So that's for an and problem. For an or problem, you have 2 separate equations, which means you're going to come up with 2 separate answers. So let's solve the first equation in one color. So if we have negative 7r plus 1 is greater than or equal to 36. If we solve this for r, we would subtract 1 from both sides. That would give us negative 7r is greater than or equal to 35. We would then have to divide by a negative, but don't forget what happens when we divide by a negative. Variable stays, inequality flips. 35 divided by negative 7 is a negative 5. So that is the first graph we're going to do. R is less than or equal to negative 5. So we're going to have a closed circle at negative 5 and shade less than. Now let's do the other one in a different color. So if we're going to do this equation, we'll have negative 2 plus 10r is greater than negative 2. Well, let's solve this. Let's add 2 to both sides. We're still trying to solve for r. So we have 10r is greater than negative 2 plus 2 would be 0. Divide both sides by 10 if you wanted to do that step. That would leave us with r is greater than 0. So that means on our graph, we have an open circle at 0 and we shade greater than. So ors are going to have split answers that go in opposite directions. Sometimes they overlap, and that's okay. And then the ands are going to be shaded just in between. And again, we'll be covering more of this on a separate video, so don't worry if you're giving a little bit of trouble. Tonight, you are going to have 10 problems on solving some inequalities. If you have trouble, please reach out and I will be in office hours. Let me know if you need help. We'll see you guys tomorrow. Thanks so much for watching.